guys, so today I'm here to talk about season 3 of the White Lotus. I am really fascinated by the themes of the season, although I will say I don't think they were expanded upon as thoroughly as in previous seasons. And while I do have issues with this season, I'm not really going to talk about them here for the most part, aside from some broader critiques in the second half of this video. But first I want to talk about the themes of the season and how they were shown. So we're going to start with the Western adoption of Eastern spirituality and religion. In this case, the season focuses a lot on Buddhism, and the show is seeking to highlight the pattern of wealthy white people who seek out Eastern religion as a means of seeming enlightened and as a form of self-actualization, while they still refuse to engage with these cultures and religions in a meaningful capacity. And this is one of the things that I thought we would see a bit more of throughout the season. I think this could have been explored further, but we do have some interesting examples to talk about. The first thing that really interested me with this was the way that each group reacts when they first get to the resort, and they're kind of told more about the spiritual nature of the retreat. And this includes giving up their phones in order to engage with each other and the spirituality and the religion on the island. And it's also highlighted as well during how certain characters react during their individual spiritual sessions, and the way lots of them kind of push back against the spiritual nature of the retreat, despite that being what it was clearly offering the entire time. They wanted to sound like they were seeking enlightenment, but then as soon as they asked to even make minor sacrifices to engage with it more meaningfully, they are unable to do that. Now, I'm mainly in this section of the video going to talk about Piper because I think she is the clearest example of the typical Western faux spiritual white woman. She spends the entire season obsessing over her connection to Buddhism, how there's her religion, going as far even as this being the entire reason that the Ratliff family are at the White Lotus and that they are in Thailand. It is solely because of Piper feeling like this need to go and connect further with this religion that she claims to believe in. However, we very quickly see, once she stays at the monastery, that she realizes it doesn't fit the ideal vision that she had in her head. And this also ends up showing how she, is unwilling to truly submit or engage with the religion in a way that would involve her sacrificing any part of her privileged, wealthy lifestyle. The fragility of her belief as well becomes even clearer when contrasted with both her father Timothy and brother Saxon, who have these different experiences during their stay in Thailand that end up being more impactful to them spiritually than Piper's faux engagement with Buddhism has ever really been. For Timothy, he is forced to confront what he truly values in the face of losing everything, and he even really connects with the monk at the monastery, and seems to be really moved when they have that conversation about death. It really resonates with him. And even though obviously we know that his actions after this don't really reflect any kind of newfound enlightenment, but there is still a moment where it seems to all make more sense to him. And we do see some kind of realization even if he doesn't follow through on that. And for Saxon, it is through his failed pursuit of Chelsea and the kind of friendship they start engaging in that he is forced to confront what he truly wants for his future and the kind of person he wants to become and, what he wants to end up valuing over time. Chelsea, very rightly points out how little he actually has personally, despite his wealth. She even goes as far as to call him soulless. And even though this is a very harsh thing to say, she also does accompany this by giving him tools to begin to pursue something better for himself ideologically. We truly see this come to fruition for Saxon when he sees Chelsea and Rick reunite in the finale. And Chelsea has spent all of this time with Saxon explaining why her relationship and connection to Rick is so important to her. She kind of treats it like a fundamental necessity for her, and I would even go as far that she believes in it in a similar way to a religion. And so this moment for Saxon really is a type of realization, and we do see a different version of him after this. And so it's interesting to see with Timothy and Saxon have these kind of realizations, whereas Piper goes on a backwards journey once she is forced to truly engage with Buddhism and any kind of Eastern religion and culture, is that she is not willing to sacrifice anything for that belief, and therefore she is not willing to truly engage with it in any meaningful capacity. Now, Chelsea also fits into a different archetype of spiritual white woman, as she constantly brings up astrology and other Western spiritual ideologies as justification for a lot of her choices and opinions. It is very clear though that she spends a lot of her time engaging with these ideas and truly does believe in them. And we can see that she does truly understand the concepts she discusses through the way that she explains them to Saxon a lot of the time. And even though there are obvious flaws in her ideology, especially the way she ties them to Rick, it's very clear that she does truly believe in whatever she is saying. For her, this ideology she has is also the cornerstone of her relationship with Rick, according to her. Now, a group in the show that I was so sure we were going to see more of, honestly I thought we'd see more of the Piper storyline from, were our three white women, Laurie, Jacqueline and Kate, because in my mind that felt like the obvious direction, that it would be those kinds of women that really engage with faux spirituality. But we never really see them engage with anything related to that. We barely even see them engage with the Thai culture. They start partying with the Russian resort workers because they meet Valentin, and they never really do anything at the resort aside from get massages and do yoga. They don't even do the bare minimum to engage with any of the Eastern religion or culture that is on offer during this visit in Thailand. Now, in contrast with the Western consumption of Eastern spiritualities, I did want to quickly discuss Guy Tok, which I'm going to talk about him more in the second section of this video, but I do think we should talk about him a little bit here because I think he's a good contrast to the way a Western audience engages with these cultures and religions. For Guy Tok, he places a very high importance on his Buddhist religion and his connection to his Thai heritage. And this is especially important to him in regards to his choice to pursue passivity and non-violence. He, repeatedly says that he does not seek to be violent in any way, and that is due to his religion. And obviously we eventually do see him sacrifice his ideology in order to progress upwards, but we will talk about that further. As a contrast to how all of these white people choose to engage with his culture, I think it's important to recognise the true way that he engages with both his culture and religion. Now, the next section of this video is going to be about our inherent tendency towards violence, and I want to start talking about this by discussing the pursuit of violence as a means of establishing masculinity. I think this is one of the main themes of the season, and there are a few examples of it, so I'm going to talk about a couple, mainly focusing on Timothy, Rick, Frank and Guy Tok. So I'm going to start with Timothy, because he soon begins, once he starts taking his wife's lorazepam, he begins to fantasize about killing himself and his family members as punishment for their greed, privilege and need for wealth, and also, and this is probably the primary reason, as a way to escape the shame he feels for losing all of these things for them. It is a blatantly selfish dream. He keeps having this fantasy that the solution to his problems, rather than actually dealing with them, is to simply kill himself and his family. However, I do believe on some subconscious level that he believes that this will spare them, perhaps, and that ultimately this is a selfless action, as they are not equipped to live a life without wealth and privilege. So next we're going to talk about Dichotomy again. He spends the entire season torn between his natural tendency towards and belief in passive non-violence, which is a result of his commitment to the Buddhist religion, and violence as a necessity for upward mobilization. Mook makes it clear that she would only be interested in a relationship with Dichotomy if he sought to improve his financial position, which for him would mean pursuing some form of violence due to his job being as a security guard at the resort. And we see him reckon with this back and forth the entire season. He very clearly does not want to pursue any kind of violent means, while Mook especially is constantly trying to push him towards doing so, and then, she will be in a relationship with him, but, she's asking him to sacrifice a big part of his morals and beliefs for her in the pursuit of violence. And eventually we do see that Dichotomy chooses violence, and this does improve his status, and it does establish his masculinity in the way that Mook wanted from him this entire time. Because at one point she did say that she only wanted a relationship with a guy that she saw as masculine and strong. So next I'm going to talk about Frank. And his dialogue in episode 5 highlights a different kind of violent masculine pursuit, as he discusses his use of Thai sex workers to come to terms with his own identity, sexual ideology, and understanding of masculinity. It becomes clear during this dialogue that Frank was torn between seeking submission and dominance in relationships, and used these sexual encounters to experience both. However, the submission he sought out also seemed to need to be at the hands of himself, the idea being that the only one that could dominate him is himself, and the only person he would willingly submit to is also himself. On the one hand, this raises a really interesting question about the kind of power dynamics that can occur within ourselves. However, we also, I think, especially have to consider the sexually violent means that Frank used to come to his own self-actualization. Like at this point when he gives this dialogue, however funny and random it is, he's now sober, but to get to that point, he had to use these Thai sex workers to live out these fantasies, to try and work out in his own head what he believed in. And that is an inherently violent idea, this use of sex and women's bodies for a man to come to his own kind of self-reckoning. That is inherently violent. And finally, I'm going to talk about Rick. Rick spends this season seeking vengeance for the death of his father, as he blames this for the many difficulties he has had throughout his life. And, rather than reckoning with this in a healthy manner, through therapy or something else, he refuses to move on from this trauma, and it ultimately, leads to his demise. He doesn't really accept love from Chelsea in any complete way either. He has healthy means on offer to him, but he chooses to pursue violence, as the right and masculine way of coping with his trauma. And so that now leads into my next section of the video, which is how the cycle of trauma can lead to unnecessary violence. And as we've just discussed, Rick is obsessed with this idea of seeking vengeance for his father's death. Rather than processing through healthy means or accepting love from Chelsea in like a true wholehearted way, he spends his entire life obsessing over what he believes was taken from him. He talks about how this ruined his childhood, his beliefs around love, and sometimes he even does go as far to use it as an excuse for his poor behaviour, especially to Chelsea. And he is certainly justified in being upset over this loss and how it impacted his life and especially his childhood. Seeking further violence as a solution will only perpetuate the cycle of trauma and violence. We can understand this in a broader sense too, as we know cycles of abuse and trauma are often perpetuated by choosing similar means as coping mechanisms instead of pursuing healthier means to heal. And in the end, we see what Rick's pursuit of violence achieves. Not justice or enlightenment, but further pain as Chelsea is killed as a result. He ends up harming the one person who was offering him complete wholehearted love, and he also ends up killing his father in this process as well, after he, finds out that he just killed his father. That only creates more trauma for him. He's now harmed 2 other people that he loves in this pursuit of violence, by seeking vengeance. And all he's done, instead of achieving justice, he has simply continued the cycle. And then, he is killed as well, therefore achieving nothing after this entire life he spent seeking vengeance. Now, another idea of violence I want to quickly touch on. I don't have a lot on this because I do think this could have been explored further in the show, but the choice between passive and violent communication I think is also very interesting here. The relationship between Laurie, Jacqueline and Kate is kind of the example we get of these alternative forms of communication. Kate is clearly a very passive communicator. She may say like a slightly pointed comment, but then she'll very quickly back away from it after kind of dropping it in there subtly. While Laurie is obviously a more violent and direct communicator, which makes sense since she is a lawyer. So she will openly give her thoughts and will lean into anger if she feels this is necessary. And Jacqueline's style of communication is far less obvious because I do think she tends to adapt based on the way in which the person she is speaking with communicates. We see her and Laurie trade off very, very aggressively. They definitely will violently communicate with one another. But with Kate, she'll definitely soften it more. I don't think she'll go as far as being passive in the way that Kate is. And so I do think her and Laurie are more similar in their violent communication. But I wouldn't say she is as violent of a communicator as Laurie is. And I do think it's very interesting the way all 3 of them interact, because Laurie's more violent communication can have her be more easily ousted during conflict within the group. And we see in the finale she kind of puts this and a lot of other things to the side in order to maintain her friendships. But it is definitely a softening of herself that I don't think is completely natural to her. Now I just want to touch on some broader critiques about the show, and I want to make this very clear. I love The White Lotus, it's one of my favourite shows, I think it's fantastic. But I do think there are a couple things that have become very obvious this season that I would like to discuss. First of all, there is an alarming pattern regarding queer characters in The White Lotus, and that is that each season features a queer relationship that somehow involves something being morally wrong. And I do think it may be time to question why this has to occur every season, especially if there is no clear or justified payoff for these narrative decisions. I think Mike White has even gone as far as to say that he wants to make gay sex transgressive again, which I think is, I don't think that's a healthy goal to have within your writing, and I have serious issues with that statement. And I do want to make it clear, this issue didn't arise for me in the first 2 seasons, as I felt that these relationships made sense narratively. But it's only with the third season and this theme continuing that I'm starting to have some questions. For instance, in season 1, Armand abuses his power over Dylan, a young resort worker, by propositioning him for sex in exchange for Dylan being able to work whatever hours he wanted. And this very clearly fits within the narrative of Armand going off the rails after he breaks his sobriety. It's very simple. It makes sense for Armand to do this within many of his other choices throughout the season, so it narratively makes sense, so I don't have an issue. In season 2, we see Quentin and Jack having sex, and at the time we believe Quentin is Jack's uncle. However, we later find out Jack is an escort and unrelated to Quentin. And this also does fit within the story, as there are many lies surrounding Quentin in order to deceive Tanya and to keep Portia occupied so that they can get to Tanya. And so while obviously this moment is definitely like the shock, or at least one of the shocks of season 2, it still does make sense narratively, so I don't again have an issue. However, in season 3, we see inklings, I guess, of Lachlan attempting to engage in an incestuous relationship with his brother Saxon. Now, the only real narrative justification I can grasp is that this is a part of Lachlan attempting to find himself both personally and sexually. However, I do not think we explore that journey for him enough to justify the inclusion of those moments in the show. I don't think that we went far enough in explaining his thinking aside from his justification in the finale, saying that he's a people pleaser in a narcissistic family and moving on. And while I don't disagree with including morally wrong aspects within the relationships between characters, I mean, there are many strange things going on between characters in White Lotus as part of what makes it good. However, the pattern of it always being between two men in this show does feel strange when compared with the heterosexual relationships, where some of them definitely have morally grey areas. I wouldn't go as far as to call them wrong in the same way that these relationships are displayed. And there are also examples where there are queer relationships in the show that aren't toxic. We have, Mia and Valentina in season 2, who are a great example of a mutually beneficial and positive sexual relationship. I just do find it a little strange that the most wrong relationship in each season of the White Lotus always seems to be a queer one between two men. Now finally, my main critique with this season of The White Lotus, and the one that's been bugging me throughout its entirety, is how audiences have started to miss the point. My main issue especially is the marketing and the brand collaborations, as these completely go against the satirical commentary the audience is supposed to be engaging in. By buying White Lotus themed products, you as an audience member are attempting to emulate characters that we are supposed to be making fun of and critiquing while watching the show. And I knew there were a lot of brand collaborations for this season, but when I researched it for this video, it was actually ridiculous. So let me read out the full list for you. We have Away Luggage, Adlin Fragrances for candles, Supergoop for sun care, Bloomingdale's for clothing, Banana Republic for clothing, Kiehl's skincare, CB2 decor, Compartes for chocolate, Nest New York for candles and fragrances, Camilla for luxury clothing, Fair Harbor for swimwear, Brunch footwear, Abercrombie clothing, H&M for clothing, Blissy pillowcases and sleepwear, Diff eyewear. And then other collaborations also include a cocktail guide, iced tea, iced coffee, and a travel journal set. Now I'm sorry to say, but if you bought a White Lotus themed anything from any of these collaborations, you have missed the fucking point of the show. Buying products to emulate the characters in the show, especially the clothing. Like, buying clothing to dress like you're at the White Lotus is ridiculous. You have completely missed the point that this is a satire and a critique on wealth inequality. If you, as a person that does not have this kind of wealth and privilege, chooses to buy things to emulate it so you can feel like these characters, we're meant to be making fun of them this whole time. We should not want to be them. We should not want to look like them. We are meant to be making fun of them and critiquing the way they behave as a result of the wealth they have accumulated. And you know, while it is obviously nothing new for shows to do collaborations at this point, for the White Lotus, it completely goes against the main objectives and themes of the show, as it is supposed to act as a critique of wealth inequality. My other point regarding how audiences have missed the point this season is the issues that arise when dissecting characters without engaging with the themes of the season. Now, this is an issue I've seen quite a bit. I don't know if it's because I look at Twitter commentary too much or what, but an issue I've seen within the commentary of this season is the lack of thematic consideration from audiences when criticising the show as a whole, especially the characters. Ultimately, this is a satirical examination of wealth inequality and class differences. This is why the resort managers are so vital to each season, why the resort workers are so important and interesting to the story, is because these characters are used to contrast between themselves and the wealthy guests and provide the wealth commentary. Audiences seeming to be confused by certain character choices and developments have also missed the point of narrative choices by refusing to engage with the themes in a meaningful capacity. You know, lots of people have been saying that the episodes were slow, and I do have some issues regarding the pace of the season, but complaining about some of the slower moments or the smaller, more nuanced interactions and claiming they were unnecessary or boring have missed the point. This is a show built upon smaller interactions. And while not all shows require this kind of active viewing, I do believe that the White Lotus hinges on it, as it is the smaller moments of interpersonal dynamics within the show that highlight the themes and ideas that it is engaging with. So people complaining about those smaller moments are not willing to meaningfully engage with the show. And while it is also just entertainment, what makes the White Lotus an entertaining show is the commentary it is engaging with and the satirical nature of it. So being unwilling to engage with those things ultimately means that you're not willing to truly engage with the show. But so, that's everything. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like the video. Like to see more from me, please subscribe. And if you'd like to see even more from me, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok. I am a makeup and special effects artist, so you can see that work there. And you also see sneak peeks with YouTube videos and what I'm working on next. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!